second segment is about children's being. Part of what children's being reminds me of is the notion that we should look at children as human beings in the present, not just as future adults, or not just focus on who they will be in the future. I think being is also about focusing on children's strengths, taking a strengths-based approach, looking at what they are learning, have learned, what they can do, rather than what they don't know and what they can't do. I think being also reminds us, or reminds educators, that one of our roles is to nurture and preserve those wonderful characteristics that babies have. The ability to kind of totally immerse yourself in experience, to be mystified and to experience awe about so many things in the world. The capacity to just totally concentrate, that drive to learn and explore and find out. We don't have to teach children those things. We just have to be sure that as adults that we don't do anything to diminish those. I also think that the concept of being is about the individuality and the uniqueness of each child, how from birth every child is a unique human being. And when you talk about being, you realize that being and belonging are very closely related. Your sense of identity, which we know is one of the learning outcomes in the framework, is very much about who you belong to. Your sense of who you are comes to a large extent from the people that you have relationships with. And there's a quote in the National Early Years Learning Framework that emphasizes the links between belonging and being. Children's connectedness and different ways of belonging with people, country, and communities helps them to learn ways of being which reflect the values, traditions, and practices of their families and communities. Over time, this learning transforms the ways they interact with others. I think also the concept of children's being is a reminder to educators that sometimes they just need to let children be, to let them daydream, to let them just relax, to just chill out, to give them space to just have fun and enjoy themselves. Of course, educators need to be concerned about children's learning, but sometimes it's enough to just be comfortable and to just enjoy yourselves. So what does that concept in the EYLF, that concept of being, mean to you? Lindsay?
One of our children particularly likes to watch from afar, and she will move away from the group, but will laugh and giggle at what's happening. But not always choose to join, and I'm hoping over time she will feel comfortable enough and will move along and want to become part of the group. But for the moment she just enjoys being by herself.
Sam?
I think being for children is feeling recognised for who they are, and us acknowledging all their personality traits and all their learning dispositions that are there and are developing. And I think it's really important that they feel that we can celebrate where they're at. And I think in relation to families as well, it's really important for us to encourage the families to appreciate where their child is at, and really celebrate what they're doing now and not always looking to the future and what they should be doing next.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting because what you're saying is that sometimes your comments and what you notice as an educator when you share that, it kind of sharpens the parents' appreciation of their child's uniqueness. I mean, you may see things that they haven't seen.
Yeah, definitely. And being in a group, obviously, that's a different dynamic for a child. Different aspects of their personality can come out. Yeah. We actually have a child who in the mornings he gets very frustrated at drop-off and can quite often become very angry and agitated. And we have this wooden cube that the children can go in. It's kind of like a cubby house, and sometimes for 45 minutes in the morning he will go into that space and I will sit with him, and he just needs that time to kind of calm down and just get to a place where he feels comfortable to join the group.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of his being, that's part of who he is.
Yeah.
Christy, what about what children's sense of being means to you?
For me, it's about children having confidence within the community to be themselves, to explore what they want to explore, interact with who they want to interact. So it's about being able to play alone, play with the group, interact with educators. We have, all of our children are very different, and we have a child who likes eye contact throughout her play. She'll interact and play with everyone, but she likes an educator to remain facing her so that she can keep that eye contact. That gives her the confidence to be herself. Where we have another child who likes an educator to be sitting close to her. We have other children who would prefer the educators to be further away and just explore themselves.
It's interesting because people who, sometimes even people within our profession who don't know babies and toddlers, or who don't think that working with them is particularly interesting, I've heard comments like, well, they're kind of all the same, you know, they don't see them as unique individuals with personalities, with strengths, with talents, with interests, with special ways of being.
I think that sometimes they think that because there's not that verbal interaction, and I'm not getting a verbal response, therefore the response you're giving me isn't really worth, you know, that of a 3-year-old maybe.
And that's why I think if you listen and observe a child, you will learn all of those things. It just takes that little bit of extra attention to detail and time to learn those things about a child.
So some of the examples you gave in talking about children's sense of being were excellent examples of individual differences, of ways that you've figured out that particular children are unique and what their needs are. Can you think of some other examples of how you cater for the uniqueness of practices that cater for individual differences or the uniqueness of each child?
We have 2 children who don't sleep in the cot rooms in cots. They prefer to sleep. We have a large playpen with separate areas, and because they're used to sleeping in a big bed, maybe with their parents, and through conversations with the parents, we decided that this was the way that they felt secure. And they sleep, I think, comforted by the 2 of them being there together, and just to go to sleep and wake up, and so that is the best way for them. And I think we have to make allowances for that. You know, we are in childcare, but the children have their own different needs, and we're respecting that, and the needs of mirroring what's happening in the family in that way.
A family daycare educator told me recently about, she has 2 babies, I think around 9 and 11 months old when we had the conversation, and she was just talking about how she had figured out fairly early that one of them likes to be picked up straight away as soon as she wakes up and taken out of her cot. And she said it took her a little bit longer, because that's what she was used to doing, to figure out that the other one really likes to kind of hang around in her cot for a while and you know, get used to being back in the world, and adjust better coming back into the group if she's given some time. So sometimes it's small preferences that you learn about. Sam, any examples you can think of?
Similar to sleeping, we have a child who's about 22 months now, and he struggled to sleep in a cot. That wasn't what he was used to at home, and so we actually have this cane bassinet that we sit in the room with us, and he sleeps in that during the day. So he's getting quite tight now, but he feels comfortable having everybody around him and in that really tight space.
Okay, so catering for individual differences is partly about being flexible and not being rigid in your own thinking or in your own, this is the way we do things here. Christy, any other examples that you think of?
We have a child who likes to sit down with the group. She's usually the first one to the table at meal times, but she's always the last. And she likes the social aspect of lunch, but she doesn't like to actually eat in front of other children. So she might play with her meal while she's sitting there talking, quite vocal, talking and chatting away to the educators and the other children. But once all the other children start to leave the table, that's when she actually eats her meal.
Wow, she likes it cold.
Yeah. So we've just learnt to allow her that extra time before she...
So it's about really paying attention, isn't it? Because it'd be easy it'd be easy to leap to the conclusion, oh, she's too distracted, we need to help her focus on eating or whatever. So again, it's that flexibility.
She's quite independent too, so in the early days we misread that as she didn't have the skills to eat, that she perhaps needed us to feed her, and that became quite obvious. She communicated that very strongly to us, that she'd prefer to use her own spoon and her own fork and her own knife.
In her own time.
In her own time.
That's about critical reflection, not leaping to conclusions, thinking what's really going on here. Great. We talked before about different sort of styles and temperaments, and the fact that some children, some babies and toddlers may find it either find it a bit more challenging to be part of the group. Lindsay, you gave us an example of that. And some children may choose to spend more time on their own, just like those individual differences in older children and in us as adults. You know, being in a group of toddlers is challenging, is hard work. And so it's interesting to look at the ways that babies and toddlers themselves find ways of separating themselves out a little bit, and that has implications for the ways environments are set up so that children can safely remove themselves from the group and of course still be supervised, but just get away from a bit of the hustle and bustle and have some time on their own. We got a couple of bits of footage of that we might look at now. So it's really important in that footage to see that the environment is set up so that that child could have some time on her own and do her own thing for a while. I think one challenge for people working in infant toddler programs is how you create those quiet, soft, comfortable places so that children can just be interested onlookers if that's what they choose to do or that's what they need to do. And obviously one of the best spaces to be an onlooker is in a educator's lap. That's a fine special place to just be. We said in the beginning when we were talking about being that one aspect of being is sometimes educators just saying it's enough for these children to be enjoying themselves, to be having fun, to be having a laugh. Occasionally to say it doesn't matter which learning outcomes it relates to, I know this is worthwhile. Let's look at a very brief little bit of footage that depicts one example of that, just doing something very interesting and a bit quirky.
Good, Jackie!
Okay, so that was just one little example of a child doing something really interesting and fun. Can you think of other examples of how you create or allow those opportunities to happen in your group of children?
Well, I think something that's really important is just allowing children time and space to play, and that may be by themselves or with other children. But I don't think it's always necessary for an educator to intercept the play, and often when the children have the most fun, it is often just one or two children playing together and doing something, you know, spontaneous.
At my service recently, we've looked at how our spaces are set up in order to accommodate the needs of children so that they have places to be. One of the outcomes from that was that we looked into our spaces and discovered that we didn't actually have a lot of spaces for children to hide or escape. So we actually incorporated tunnels, we broke down our space into smaller areas, and then we looked at where the staff position themselves, because toddlers generally, babies and toddlers generally congregate around where the educators are. So if the educators are all sitting together, that's where you'll find all the children. So that that takes away from children being able to be. So we now position ourselves so that everyone's spaced out around the room, and that has created opportunities, and a lot more opportunities than we saw in the past, of children being able to be in spaces but also have that support of educators if they needed that.
I think toddlers really enjoy getting in and under things. We have several big chairs, and quite often they'll be underneath them or around the corner and sort of playing this sort of peekaboo with each other. There's also a space when you come in through our door, and some of the toddlers have taken to sitting there with their legs sort of out, just sort of chilling by the door. So that's been quite interesting lately.
We're going to end this this segment with a heavily edited video of an educator helping a young child go to sleep. I say heavily edited because when we filmed this, it took about 25 or 30 minutes for this to happen. And it shows an educator working very patiently and very attentively over a fair period of time to meet the needs of this baby. And in some ways it illustrates so much of what we've talked about being and about what's important, so much about what's important in babies and toddlers' experience in general. The importance of warmth and caring, gentleness, the importance of continuity between home and what happens at home and what happens in the service, perseverance by the educator, and individualizing routines. Sam, could you give us a bit of background information about this child and about this practice?
Yeah, so this child, when they actually started, her mother was a little bit concerned about how she would sleep at the centre. She'd been having a lot of trouble sleeping in a cot at home, and quite often she would sleep in her mother's arms during the day. So we worked with the parent and we discussed some options about what we could try. And we actually worked out to begin with that we would try a wrap. So basically had a bit of material wrapped around us that the child could really sneak into, and the child just slept on us throughout the day, so we could walk around with her, and that way she felt really, really comfortable and safe, and she actually really likes to have background noise. So in the video you'll see that she's actually moved to a rocker, and we've been slowly transitioning her to try and get her eventually to a cot. But yeah, she's in the rocker in the day. She really likes having people around her, but she does take a little bit of time being rocked to really settle down and get to sleep.
So what we're seeing is a work in progress.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, that's really great that you guys take the time to do that. Does she come every day, that child?
3 days a week.
3 days a week, okay. Good, great.
I think it's a really important skill for children to learn, and I think it's great that you can see that there's actually an end to that process, that this is just a process that the child needs to learn, and there's steps in between.
Lots of steps in between.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over a long time.
So we've canvassed a fair few meanings of that concept of being for babies and toddlers. I'm just wondering if you had to identify from our discussion or something we haven't even talked about, the key practices for educators that support that sense of each child's being. What would you say?
Taking the time to get to know the child, I think, and what's needed for them, what they feel is important in that segment. That child really needed that time. Other children need the time to sit and eat, and other children, it's okay for them just to appear like they're just observing and not taking part, when really they're learning from that as well.
And sometimes it's their choice. It's not that they're scared or they're insecure. That's what they choose to do. Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, I think it's important to also know how each child likes to learn, and obviously that changes over time, but understanding at any moment whether a child does need you to be reflecting on what's happening, or whether you do need to leave them to play. And I think just knowing each child's individual learning style is really important.
Christy?
Probably the only thing I'd say is that finding that information in the first place,
Yeah.
knowing the child and then allowing them to just be.
Yeah. And maybe not being driven by the clock. That comes through to me, not just in that last segment, but sometimes it's very easy to allow the schedule or the timetable or the clock itself to dominate your thinking, rather than what are the most useful and most important things that we can be doing now.
I think that comes down to the educators that you're working with, that you're all on the same page with that it doesn't matter if it's officially cutting into 10 minutes of your lunchtime, but the child really needs that to go on, and you'll still get your break, but it's being flexible, not being rigid. And that helps the flow and the calmness of the room, I think, which passes on to the children that are in it.